Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Louise Street, and I'm the Executive Officer of the Association of Consulting Architects here in Brisbane. And this is the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum webinar, which we are hosting. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and waters of Australia. We have a national audience today. We pay respects to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. Firstly, I'd like to go through a little bit of housekeeping. So this webinar will be recorded, and you may have heard the start of that. Please keep your videos on so that Georgia Henry can see her audience, but your microphone's off unless you're asking a question. You'll be able to add questions in the chat during the session, or at the end we have an allocated time for you to ask questions directly to Georgia. Now I'm pleased to introduce Justine Ebzery from Fulton Trotter. Justine is the chair of the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum here in Queensland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. As Louise mentioned, I am a director and architect with Fulton Trotter Architects, and I've been chairing the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum for Queensland and the Northern Territory since about March last year, which is when it was started by the ACA. And the mission of the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum is to raise awareness of mental wellbeing in the architectural profession and share knowledge and resources in order to strengthen our practices. Today's topic about managing client expectations and dealing with bad behaviour was identified by the forum as a real stress for architects. So I'm very excited to hear what Georgia has to share with us today. I'm very pleased to be introducing her. Georgia Henry is the founder and CEO of Henry Reed, a specialist consulting and advisory business that drives positive change in organisations by helping their leaders to identify and overcome any roadblocks and challenges presented by their culture. Now, Georgia is passionate about the impact of culture on an organisation's effectiveness and their ability to achieve their financial and non-financial results, mitigate risks and drive their competitive advantage. Georgia is a graduate member of the AICD, an approved advisor with the Advisory Board Centre and Family Business Association, an industry mentor through the Australian Human Resources Institute, a published thought leader and keynote speaker. Now, over the past 25 years, Georgia has contributed to the success of a diverse range of national and multinational organisations across many industries as an executive and advisor and a director. So I'm going to hand over to Georgia now. Welcome and thank you, Georgia.
Fantastic. Thanks, Justine, and really pleased to be here. One of the things that wasn't in that introduction is that I'm the daughter of an architect and the granddaughter of an architect. So my dad and my grandfather were architects, so I feel I have some real affinity with this group and some deep understanding from lived experiences of the impacts of the work that you do and the relationships that you have on mental health and well-being. So this, as Justine explained, my area of specialty through Henry Reed is organisation, culture and leadership. And I was really pleased to be able to contribute to this topic around managing client expectations and bad behaviours, because it's a really essential impact, an important impact of culture that's not often addressed. Because when we think of organisational culture, we think of the way we do things around here, around internal behaviours and the way that we manage things and create an environment and ways of working internally. But one of those biggest impact areas is the way that our internal employee experience and expectations for how we manage behaviours impacts our client experience. So the employee experience and client experience are incredibly linked. And depending on the internal culture of the organisation that you work for and the way you do things and acceptable behaviours can really impact your ability to manage those client expectations and manage bad behaviours. Some examples are if you work with an organisation that has a culture of insisting that the client's always right, it can be a real challenge to address those issues. Or a culture where you're not encouraged to speak up or have a voice, or a culture that really avoids conflict. It can make being able to address these issues even more challenging. And when we don't address the issues, it has a significant impact on our mental health and well-being. So we're going to talk through a few issues through the session today. But what I want to do is to really start to get an understanding of the sentiment in the participant group that we have. So we've got a quick poll that we're going to launch now. And I'd just like you to take a couple of minutes to answer the questions on the poll when that comes up. You should be seeing the poll coming up in a couple of minutes or in a moment. Everyone see that? Putting head nodding? Not yet. No, not yet. Louise, be able to get the poll opened?
So some
I've got the poll open. I can, if I don't tick one of the boxes on number 2, it won't let me submit it.
Right. Okay. So you need to tick a box on number 2.
But you only tick a box on number 2 if you answer yes in number 1. But if you answer 2 no in number 1.
Rightio. Okay. So let's see everyone. I'm happy to see if you answer yes to number 1. Let's see what the main issues are that are coming up in there. So we'll see what the results come through as. We won't let the technical difficulties stop us gathering some of the key insights and information as we move forward. So I'll give everyone a moment to answer the poll. Okay, we might close that now and share the results, see how we go with the type of answers that we've got. All right, so we're going to have a look at some of the key issues there that are coming up. Some people don't have issues with managing client expectations. That's great, but the main front runner of if you do have issues managing client expectation is fearing the repercussions of conflict, and that is a really big issue is understanding what those repercussions might be. Sometimes it's internal repercussions. It's fearing the loss of or damage to a client relationship. The other things that have been highlighted there are I'm not confident to raise difficult issues and I'm not good at dealing with emotional issues. So we're going to cover off most of that today. The final one, question 3 there, which is a fairly shocking result. 75% of the group in this audience indicate that they've been subjected to unreasonable or inappropriate behaviour from clients or others at work. So that's a very high percentage. So what we're going to do today is talk through some of the ways that you can start to set expectations and manage some of those situations when they come up. So we'll close that poll now and close that result down. So when we talk about mental health and well-being and managing expectations and fearing repercussions or not wanting to raise issues or dealing with emotional issues, the key words around all of those things are emotions. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about emotions, guys. Sorry, I know a lot of guys don't like talking about emotions in the room, but it's a really important thing to do because we're human and we all have emotions, and understanding the impact of our emotions on the way that we make decisions, the way that we behave and the way that we choose to act is really important. I'm going to share my screen now, so bear with me just one moment. Okay, so you should see there, this is the science lesson for the day. This is the science of emotions, and it's really important to understand when we start to talk about why we may fear repercussions, why we might find it difficult when we're in situations to address things. So our brain is wired with an emotional brain and a thinking brain, and what generally happens is any thoughts or response or reaction to a situation happens to in our emotional brain first. It's the good old fight or flight syndrome. So a stimulus or an event or a situation happens, and we respond emotionally before we respond laterally or engage to find a solution. And the reason this is really important to understand is because it has a significant impact on our decisions and actions and behaviours. So if you think of the situation where you might see someone coming towards you or know you're about to have an interaction with someone that you've had a difficult or a challenging discussion or interaction with in the past, you might find the emotions start to make you feel nervous or fearful. So your body is preparing you for what comes next. That can be really useful in some situations and really damaging in others. So when we are responding, having an emotional response, it can limit our thinking, particularly a negative emotional response. We start to shut down our thinking. And I'll give you an example, and you might be able to relate to this. If you've ever been in an argument with someone and you have quite negative emotions, and you walk away from that argument, and 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes later, you think, "Oh, I wish I'd said X, Y, and Z." What has happened when you're in that threat situation is your thinking shuts down, it narrows and limits, and when you come away from that, you actually start to think more clearly. So emotions are really important to understand because they're something that we all have as humans, but they're not necessarily something that we can control. We can start to learn and recognise our own emotions. We cannot control the emotional responses of other people. What we can control is behaviours of ourselves. We can address the behaviours of others. We can address situations or the problem that we've identified to resolve. We need to understand that feelings and emotions of ourselves and others impact the way we behave. Our feelings and emotions are impacted by the situation that we're in. So if we start to understand that our feelings and emotions actually are impacted by the situations or the problem to resolve, and then change the way that we behave, we can start to focus on where do we need to spend our time and energy to get the right result. Responding to a situation, a client problem, a change in design brief, might make us feel upset or angry or frustrated, and that may change the way we respond. Focusing on the feelings and emotions actually does not help resolve the situation. So similarly, when we are in a situation where someone has behaved badly towards us, inappropriately or treated us badly, that will impact our feelings and emotions. And we need to respond to the behaviour, and we respond to that behaviour and addressing the behaviour of the problem to solve. We need to limit the emotions that we use because the emotions make it more difficult to actually resolve situations. So setting us up for success, we need to focus on those things that we can control. And it's important to recognise our emotions and the emotions of other people as well. So these are the things that we need to focus on when we're looking at how do we manage client expectations, and how do we manage client expectations, or how do we address the behaviours of others that need to be resolved. So there's a few things that we're going to go through, some very simple tools which are around, we usually use them internally in organisations around giving and receiving feedback, and then also goal setting. So we're going to talk through a couple of models that will help give you some tools to address these situations in a way that hopefully builds some confidence as well. So the first one is a providing feedback model called the SIA model, the SEIA. It's really simple. And I find that this model is one that you can use to frame up almost any conversation. So when we have people who've indicated that they're not confident to raise difficult issues or are not good at dealing with emotional issues, this is a really simple model to help guide your preparation for a conversation and the way that the conversation can be had. So it is about simply setting up the framework for the conversation by stating the situation. So by simply stating the situation, you give context to the start of the conversation or the feedback that you're about to deliver. And that helps the other person understand and prepare for what's coming next. So the situation might be, I really need to have a conversation with you about the changes that we agreed on at our last meeting, because there have been some things that can't go forward the way that we had progressed, for example. So you set the situation up. If it's around behaviours, instead of, the second part is evidence. So when we start to talk about evidence to support feedback or evidence to support the problem to solve, when we base things on evidence or observed behaviours, what we do is we remove the emotion. So it could be, I'm really upset and I'm really angry. But if we don't focus on the reasons why, or how do you know what's happened, we start to work in emotions that we can't actually move forward and resolve. So providing evidence to support why you want to have the conversation, why you want to provide feedback. So it's not opinion-based, it's not emotional, actually allows you then to get to the root cause of an issue. It is important, though, to explain when you're giving feedback or looking at how to manage an expectation, to explain the impact of the situation and the evidence or the consequences to help that person you're having a conversation with understand the importance, why this is important, that things that might have changed and that there are consequences to that. And then we discuss the actions and the way forward. So in these situations, with any model, it doesn't generally happen that people are going to provide you with feedback in this way or respond to you in a way that's simple for you to use this model. Quite often we'll start having a conversation talking about the situation and behaviours or the evidence, and they might jump in with, yes, but I'm really angry about this, or another wanting to give their point of view. So when we provide feedback, we also have to be prepared to receive feedback. And we're doing this as the AAA model. If someone is then, and you're having a conversation with them to try and set an expectation or manage an expectation, and they jump in with something else, they might jump in to say, well, I'm furious. I'm really angry that this has happened. You need to acknowledge the emotion or acknowledge the feedback that's being given. I can see that you're upset by this. I understand that this is different to this is not the way we expected things to work out. Acknowledge their feelings and emotions, but we cannot control their feelings and emotions. We have to focus it back on the issue. So once you've acknowledged, ask questions. You can clarify why they're angry or upset. Ask questions to ensure you understand the situation, the evidence, the impact, and what action they would like. So what you're doing is looping back to putting in the feedback in the evidence, situation, evidence, impact, action. You're focusing on the root cause and not the emotion, but you're acknowledging the emotion or acknowledging their feedback to you. And by asking questions, you're actually getting the information in a useful way for you to be able to then respond to the feedback appropriately because you've got evidence, not emotion. You understand the situation, you understand the impact for them, and what action they would like to resolve it. So giving and receiving feedback and using a simple model like this can help you structure conversations, so help you prepare when you need to have a difficult conversation. It can also help you make sure when you're on the receiving end of feedback or a situation or a communication, that you can start to take control rather than feeling like you're overwhelmed with someone's anger or overwhelmed with someone else's emotions or frustrations. It actually gives you the position of control, which is really important when we look at how we're then able to use our technical knowledge and expertise and our understanding of the situation and the evidence that we have to be able to come up with the best solution. So at the start of setting client expectations, and I'm sure all practices have a process, a planning process. When you start a project, you will have clarity of what the outcomes and goals are. However, as projects move forward, things change. So the next model I'm going to share with you is called the GROW model. And it's actually a coaching model. So we use it internally with employees to coach staff for continuous improvement and to look at what are the ways that we can do things. So it's a really great check-in and resetting of expectations. And the GROW simply stands for the goal. So what is it that we want to achieve? And so when you're having regular work in progress meetings or updates, or you've had to provide feedback to a client where you need a different outcome, what is the ultimate goal? Let's agree on the goal. Let's discuss the reality. What are all the things that are happening right now that we need to talk about? It's no point pretending things aren't happening, particularly when they're going wrong. It's important to acknowledge the reality of the situation for your client and for yourself. Look at all the options. What options do we have? And options also include consequences. So if we take this option, it will cost this much more. It will delay the project by this much. These are the things that you need to be aware of. And then in the GROW model, the W stands for will, but it's really the way forward. So what choices will you make together and agree on together to reset that client expectation? I will always say, whether you're addressing this internally or whether you're addressing this externally with the client, when you get to that way forward, it needs to be clarified and confirmed in writing to give you an understanding of a point of reference and a point of time to come back to. So I just want to share, before I move on, one of the questions that we had prior to the session, which was shared, wanting to know how do we resolve some of these issues. And the question was, how do you approach a client who is refusing to take responsibility for decisions that were made by them, but then during construction they blame the architects and claim that the design is not fit for purpose? Does that sound like a situation some of you have dealt with in the past? Can see some acknowledgement there. So how do you approach a client who's refusing to take responsibility for decisions that were made by them, but then during construction they blame the architects and claim that design's not fit for purpose? So if we go back to the model, you need to address it with the client. You need to explain the situation to them, that there were agreed outcomes at the start, and remind them with the evidence of the decisions that were made by them. At that point, they're probably going to interject and tell them how angry they are, or how frustrated they are, or how disappointed they are. And so again, acknowledge, if we go to the next part of it, acknowledge their emotion. Ask them questions to understand exactly why, exactly when, what was not clear, what evidence, why do you believe the architects were at fault when these decisions were made? and agreed at the time, and then provide the answer. It's then about resetting. What is to find the way forward? How do we reset? What is it, the outcome that you ultimately want to achieve? What is the reality? Now, you're not going to be able to please everyone all the time, but what is the current reality of what is possible and what is not possible, and working through the options to get to the way forward. So these are difficult conversations and they require planning. One of the biggest things that you can do to ensure success when you're starting a conversation around managing expectations is the use of questions. So questioning is really essential. Don't make assumptions. Don't bring your personal bias of a client or a situation. You need to ask open-ended questions to really get to a point of understanding. And when you're asking questions, you need to listen. And most people, we find when there are challenging situations, people listen to respond. They're thinking about, how am I going to respond to that answer that's going to put me in the best position possible. One of the things we have to do when we listen, instead of listening to respond, is listen to understand. And to really deeply understand, we continue to question. The other key part of managing client expectations or interacting positively in any difficult situation is the language that you use. It's around not using emotive language. You made me feel, I am feeling, I'm angry. Any of that type of language, we don't use very self-focused language. I didn't call you back because I was busy. No one cares. It's around using the language around how we are positive and move forward, about limiting technical jargon, plain English, plain language to be able to set those expectations. So there's a whole lot of different things that go into setting, having these conversations. And these conversations are not linear. So when I can say you start here and you follow a process through, these conversations generally are not linear. And you need to recognise and be prepared. Quite often we'll start with setting an expectation, setting a goal, knowing the way forward, having a check-in to explain when things are going wrong, what might be working, what might not be working so well, what the impact of that is and the way forward. We need to respond to their feedback. And quite often through this ask process, we head back to the situation, evidence, impact, action. When we get to the action, we can turn back into the grow conversation about resetting goals. And so while these conversations are not linear, these tools can really help you to prepare and control the situation and the conversation with confidence. Because when you lose control of the situation or it becomes highly emotive, you lose the confidence to be able to address these things and focus on the key issues. And then it becomes much more difficult to be able to come to a mutually beneficial solution. So what one of the things that we, on the poll result that I just want to address at this point too, because addressing bad behaviour, inappropriate behaviour that's happening to us is really challenging because quite often we feel threatened. If we look at that emotional brain, when we're being suffering from inappropriate or bad behaviour, our thinking starts to shut down. And while this isn't a webinar on bullying or inappropriate behaviour, it's really important to know that you need to address those types of behaviours, because in my experience, majority of the time when people are made aware that their behaviours are having a significant and serious negative impact on you, they change the behaviour because it's not their intent. But they may not be aware of the impact. So the situation, evidence, impact, action in addressing behaviours that are inappropriate, it can help you prepare, it can help you actually gather the evidence and your thoughts around the behaviours that you've observed or experienced. You share the impact that that person's behaviour is having on you. And the impact can be an emotional impact. It can be, it makes me quite fearful, or it makes me feel threatened, or it makes me, lose confidence in the way to go forward. And the action might be, I'd really like you to change that behaviour, or please respect my personal boundaries, or whatever the action is. So using this simple model to be able to call out the bad behaviours of others and address it will help to resolve it in a lot of cases. If you have done that and you still are experiencing the bad behaviour from that same person without setting boundaries or letting people know what is acceptable or not, it shows an intent, and that's an entirely different situation. So sort of in a quick summary and in a short webinar, there's a lot of information here to cover. But I think really what it's all about is when we're looking at how do we set and manage client expectations, particularly when there is significant change or emotion involved or inappropriate behaviours, you need to firstly identify what is the problem to solve. It's not about the emotion, it's about finding the root cause and then working proactively to take control of the situation, recognizing and understanding what is and what is not within your control. Having the conversation is within your control. Addressing the issues around the problem is within your control. It is not within your control to make someone happy, to remove frustration. Resolving the situation will impact their emotions. It's about then understanding what's within your control and developing your capability, or using the capability that you already have. You need to trust your technical expertise and knowledge, and you need to feel confident that you can share your technical expertise and knowledge to help with understanding, to help with that evidence, to help people understand the impact and agree on the way forward. And you need to develop your capability to address issues and communicate effectively. So some of these simple tools will help, but they're much simpler on the screen, on the presentation, than they are in practice. So it takes practice to be able to start to frame up these conversations and feel confident to have the conversations. So the last thing there is confidence, and that comes through capability building. So practicing and becoming more sure of yourself, removing some of that resistance to have the difficult conversation, controlling the situation. And your confidence in doing this will also build from demonstrated results and building stronger relationships. All of that does result in improved mental health and well-being. And I'll just say, with that capability building and using some of these very simple tools to be able to have some difficult conversations or resolve difficult issues, they're really great to practice with family members, to look at what are the situations that we might need to get a different result. With teenagers, perfect. Practice at home, practice in a safe space to be able to look at how you're able to remove the impact of emotions or limit the impact of emotions, focus issues on achieving the outcomes and the result that you're looking to achieve. So I'm going to stop sharing there and want to open it up to questions. I think Justine's going to help me with questions that might have, if you've got questions, I think we're placing them in the chat. Is that right, Justine?
Yeah, place your questions in the chat, or put up your use the symbol to put up your hand. We welcome questions articulated as well. Any questions? Can't see any hands up at the moment. Yeah. Okay, Mark, love to hear your question.
Thank you. It's really more an observation, but I'm interested in your opinion. So you if I understand correctly, you're talking about dealing with this after the event, after something bad's happened. But there's a lot to be said, isn't there, for doing a lot of homework before you start a commission, and trying to understand who we're dealing with, because a lot of projects go for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And if you can't work with the person, it doesn't matter how good everything else is, it's probably going to fall apart. So that's point number one. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in money, because money is the source of a lot of conflict. And when the fee starts running out, people's emotions, come to the surface. A lot goes bad. And the other observation is you're sort of assuming that people will act rationally. I quite like the steps you took us through.
Yep.
But when someone starts lying or not behaving rationally, it's very hard to follow those steps. So I know there's a lot in what I just said, but I'm interested in your comments.
Great. No, that's perfect. Let's start with the first thing first, which was establishing the expectations up front. And 100% agree. It's really important to, as Mark said, do the research, know who you're dealing with, but also to have a lot of those goal setting outcomes conversations up front. So using that simple sort of model is, what is it that they're really looking for? What is the ultimate goal? What is the reality? How much money do they have to spend? What are all the challenges? What are the complexities around the project? What are the restraints? What are the resources? What are the time frames? The more that you can actually address and agree on upfront, and I would always say, and put it in writing, but also using your technical expertise and knowledge to guide the client through what is possible and what is not possible, and being really open and honest and transparent, and not saying, yep, we can do that, yep, no problem, we can do that, because you can't. And unless you are really clear around the reality of what's possible, given everything that you know, and that's the thing, is everything that you know, you won't know everything to start with. So the importance of asking a lot of questions and investing the time up front to establish those expectations, guiding your client with your technical expertise and knowledge through what the consequences of different options are to agree on the way forward is really essential. The more that you can do that up front, the easier the engagement is. We have the same in my business. It's we deal with big, long projects that might be a year or two long, and it's impossible to know everything from the start of a project. But if you can establish the ways of communicating, when we're going to check in, understand that reality up front, it makes it easier to have the conversations when things that are outside of your control happen or different decisions are made. So the second issue Mark raised there was around money, and the money's running out, so what do we do next? That's one of those check-in conversations. That's one of those things that you need to establish up front, but also regularly check in on this, because it's same in our business. I have clients say, we'd like to do this and then that, and then we'll go into this project. And the first question I ask after saying, that sounds fantastic, what budget do you have for this? Because if you don't address the issue of money, it's one of those things that is a hard limitation. You cannot proceed without budget. So you can't fear the conversation about money. Most of us don't like talking about money, but it is a reality of someone who's wanting to engage with your services and get the outcome that they desire. So when you say, what budget do you have for this? Or this is how much it's going to cost. And they'll say, oh, I really thought it would be less than that. What can you do for half that price? Conversations like that happen all the time. It's about the reality. This is where we need to be. guiding back through those expectations. So what are the options? And if you take this option, this is the consequence. We can do it for this, but this is what will happen. This is the flow-on impact. So money is a conflict area, but it's one that you cannot shy away from, because it is one of the key limitations and enablers of the work that you do. The third one that Mark said was assuming people will act in a rational way, and that lying is when the people start to lie. What do you do? I call them on it. So again, that takes challenge. But what you need to do, it's a behaviour. Lying is a behaviour that is having a really negative impact on your ability to do your job or deliver a result. So you don't call them out by saying you're lying on it. You're lying about something, but you can say, look, the situation is that we seem to be viewing it from different perspectives, or whatever the situation is. And the reason I know that is the last time that this has happened and you agreed this, but now you're saying this, this and this. So you can actually say there's a discrepancy here between what you said and what we've agreed, what I know that you've done, or the evidence that I have, or the behaviours that I've observed, and your perspective, or what you're now saying. So you don't need to say they're lying, but what you're now saying is this. The impact that has is that it's created confusion. We no longer are able to meet the timeframes because these different things have blown out, and so we need to reset and agree the way forward.
Georgia,
So,
can I just take you back
Yep.
to the money question, please?
Yes, please.
So when I was mentioning money, I was thinking more fees rather than the client's budget.
Okay.
And a common situation I find
Yep.
is what we call death by 1,000 cuts.
Yep.
So you're asked to do a certain job. They ask for this little bit more. And because most of us are agreeable, you don't put your hand out and ask for more fees. And after this happens, 50 or 100 times on a project, you start to feel it, and it
Yep.
becomes a problem. So
Yep.
what advice do you give between, being agreeable on one side and appearing to be cooperative and responding to your client's wishes, versus being perhaps more contractual and not as friendly, and perhaps establishing a different relationship, because
Yep.
it will establish a different relationship.
Absolutely. I go back to saying it's something that you need to talk through upfront, but you also need to understand where your personal boundaries are. So what is acceptable to you? I can be really nice and do all sorts of things and give some extra things for free, but I'm not going to bleed to death from that death by 1,000 cuts, because there's a boundary. And you're entering into a professional commercial relationship with a client, and it's one of those things that you need to agree up front. So being agreeable and being flexible and adaptable is part of giving a great service. Doing it for free is not. Doing it for free is bad business. So when we're talking about a commercial relationship and being agreeable and doing things, they're two very different things. What you need to do is establish client expectations that when changes happen upfront, and we will, through the life of a project, experiencing changes that we need to respond to, we're going to have a discussion about that, and some of those things may require additional fees. Set that expectation up front. What you do next with that is what you take on or don't take on is up to you and your client to negotiate with. But I would always be setting an expectation about fees particularly relating to changes, scope changes, decisions that are being made, and what that might look like, what the consequences of that might be. So it's really about, you still need to have an agreeable, positive client relationship, but you also need to have openness and honesty and the ability to have those discussions. because that's part of a mutually beneficial relationship. Anyone else have any other questions that we want to?
Georgia, there's just a few comments, particularly on that fee issue that
Yeah.
might be worth you reading. So there's been some comments made that asking to be paid is not being unagreeable. And in fact, running out of fees on a project makes it very difficult to be agreeable.
Yeah.
Why are architects softies and get ourselves in this fee situation? Imagine a client behaving in that manner with doctors and lawyers. What would those outcomes be? And a comment that if we don't value our professional services and charge for the services rendered, no one else will value them.
Absolutely, and that's a really important part. And these are some of the skills, being able to have these conversations, being able to feel confident and trust our technical expertise and knowledge and the value that we add is not taught to us, and it's really it can be really challenging to know how to do it. So using some simple tools like that feedback tool or the GROW model to set expectations or have conversations, the more you do that, the more comfortable and confident you become in being able to address these issues. And knowing that it's not about the emotion, it's based on evidence. In fact, you want X, you have to pay Y, or you want X plus Y. It's going to take time and money and resources to do that. It's about trying to manage your own emotions, your own fear of being able to address situations with clients. We fear damaging relationships by having conversations. It's human nature. But you do yourself more damage by not having the discussion. So if you take the emotion away and you start to build your skills on having the conversations, it actually becomes easier and easier to address those in a non-emotional way and create a respectful relationship rather than a fearful relationship.
Thank you, Georgia. We've got a great question come through from Jennifer.
Yeah.
She said, if a client behaves badly to the point that you want to terminate the relationship, what advice would you have around managing that type of conversation?
Yeah. So the first thing I would do is always when bad behaviour starts, you address it when it starts. You don't accept it. So that's around having a conversation early to say what the situation is, what you've observed, the behaviours, the impact it's having on you or your ability to do the work or your team or the project, and what you need to stop. Because behaviours that start like this end up like this fairly quickly, and over time they escalate. Also, behaviours that remain unaddressed. Some people see that as an acceptance and that it's okay. You're giving me permission to continue to behave like this, rather than saying, look, when we had the conversation, you use this language or you behave badly in this way. This is what I've observed. This is the impact. I really like that to stop so we can have a more productive working relationship. So I always say call behaviours early, because the longer they go on, the harder they are to address and the bigger the problem and the impact is. If you get to the situation where and most times when you address behaviours initially, you'll see a shift or a change in the behaviours. Don't be afraid to address it again if it continues. If behaviour you've addressed and you've set some boundaries, said that's not okay, and they continue, it shows an intent. It shows an intent to behave that way. You've addressed it. You've told them it's not productive, it's not helpful, it's impacting you or the project. And if they continue, there's an intent to continue. That's a completely different situation. When you get to that situation, and you need to you want to terminate the relationship or the agreement, you've at least got evidence of, we've had this discussion, this is what was addressed, this continued to happen, this is no longer a feasible working relationship. So by not addressing it, it becomes emotive, it becomes not based on evidence of behaviours, and you haven't addressed it. And also sometimes when we're in a situation, we're on the receiving end of bad behaviour that continues and we haven't addressed it. Quite often, we get into that shutdown, our emotional brain is telling us every interaction we're having with this person is negative. We can't think, we can't continue. Whereas if we address it, we can actually find different solutions quite often.
Thanks, Georgia.
I hope
I
that
guess-
helped.
Yeah. In support of that, we've got a comment from Clancy that said we find flagging the scope creep early, even if we offer to undertake the work at no additional cost the first time, sets up an expectation for additional fees in the future if it continues to happen. So
Yeah.
good advice.
Absolutely.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Great, Catherine.
Yeah, so if you get a challenging behaviour from a client, it does all those things that you
Yep.
talk about, affects how your brain. I go into a panic, and your palms are sweaty and your
Yep.
heart's beating, and then you can't think straight. So what sort of tools would you recommend for that immediate interaction, which is really stressful and a bit unnerving, and then
Yep.
it's hard. I need time to step away and sort of think it through, but sometimes you don't have the luxury of doing that.
Yeah, I would always try and get that time and that break, or if you know that that's likely to happen in that situation, just say, look, I'd really like to consider that. Do you mind if we just take a short break so I can put some thoughts together? If you can, if you're in a situation that is damaging like that, that is really having an impact on your ability to work or to provide a response, I always ask for time because you need to be able to pull those emotions back down and then allow your thinking brain to start to think about the best response. The way that I generally would do that, even if you're in a meeting where it is quite difficult, is I write them down. So even if you're in a meeting and you're feeling those emotions and you can't get away from it, I generally will start writing down what are the things that are within my control that I need to address here. So I can't control the other person's anger or bad behaviour right now. What is it that I need to know to bring the control back to me? Even though I might be upset or fearful or frustrated. So one of the tools, if you can't get space, is to start to ask some questions and listen to understand. You can call it, you can say, I can see that you're very angry right now. I can see that you're very frustrated or very upset right now. I'd like to understand more. Can you tell me exactly what the situation is? How do you know that? So what is the evidence? How do you know that? And start to redirect from emotion and negativity into things that your thinking brain can control, and it pulls you back into control of the situation. But I would always say, Catherine, if you're in that situation where you're feeling that your thinking shut down, you're feeling quite threatened or fearful, the best thing to do is to try and remove yourself from the situation immediately, so then you can prepare and come back and address it in the right way.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we've got a question from Kristen. Is
Yes.
it better to address concerns in writing than in person?
I'm a big believer of try to resolve issues in person and follow up in writing. When we address issues in writing, in the first instance, there can be a lot of misinterpretation, a misinterpretation of intent, of tone, of real issues, because that person is reading the message in writing without looking at your body language, without seeing a smiling face or an angry face. They're interpreting through their emotional brain what they think the intent is. So for me, it's always prepare in writing, have the meeting in person, follow up in writing, so that you've got a trail. Prepare in writing so that when you're in the situation, you are focused on all of those things that need to be addressed, and you remain in control. You have the meeting in person and you address it in person. because of the emotional responses and being able to keep control of the situation and their response as well as your own, and always follow up in writing. So you have the, all of those things recorded for future reference as well.
Great, thank you, Georgia.
Pleasure.
Have we got any other questions or comments that people would like to share? A lot of comments in the chat, Georgia, about agreeing with you.
Oh, good.
About preparing in writing. So Paul has said, we have a practice of making a key points list with questions and a summary of facts prior to communicating in person.
Yeah.
I've just got I suppose, a follow-up comment from what Mark raised. I've just had an issue where we've gone well over and above the town planning allowance that we allowed for, because council have come back and said, look, we don't agree with this, and this, and we've had to redesign. So I just had an open conversation with the client and said, I haven't allowed for all of this redesign work in our fee. And he said, well, just come back to me and tell me what you think is fair and reasonable. I trust him in what you're going to say, and we can just discuss and come to a compromise. So I think a compromise solution is always better than kind of not saying it. And I know when I've raised it in the past with clients, I've either said, look, we've taken a bit of a hit here, we've had to do more work, but I'm happy to do that because it's ended up being a great result for the project, and they kind of appreciate that, and it's kind of one in your back pocket to pull out later if something else comes up. But I've always found if you keep the clean and clear lines of communication, and you're open and honest and non-emotional, there's nothing that I haven't been able to resolve, really, apart from I had one absolutely nutty client. And I did terminate because she said, I'm not allowing you on site. I don't agree with what you're saying. So I said, okay, if I can't come on site, I can't act as the architect. Therefore, I'm terminating the agreement.
Yeah. Exactly, Gary, and it's those things will change, and there will be, when you're planning long-term projects, there are always going to be unforeseen things, challenges, things that happen that are outside of your control. That's when you have to jump straight in and have those conversations, reset the goals and the expectations, explain the reality, look at all the options and agree the way forward. Those are the many conversations that you have along the way that strengthen a really trusted relationship and allow you to keep adding value and developing a really strong relationship for the future.
We've got a question from Kathy.
Yep.
As architects, we're often the meat in the sandwich with problems.
Yep.
For example, builder to client. How best can we deal with that?
Collaboration. So quite often you are the meat in the sandwich, but you're working on the one project. So I would be saying again, it's the same thing. You set expectations with the client. You need to set expectations with others who are on site or others that you need to interact with. It's about you might be the meat in the sandwich and the one that is feeling the pressure. You feel the pressure from both sides. But you need to maintain the control. You need to use those communication skills to manage both relationships. So keeping focused on the end, keeping everyone focused on the end in mind, which is the outcomes, the project, the value add, whatever it is that you're working towards. Having all those regular conversations again is the way forward. Now we can get squeezed in the middle. Sometimes in that situation, I find the best thing to do is to collaborate or mediate, bring people together and set those expectations together so that everyone's on the same page. They're not. There's a level of trust that comes from common understanding. People aren't feeling that you're saying one thing to one person and another thing to someone else because I don't trust you. What did you tell the other person? I don't believe that's the way it is. Put everyone in the room and work it out together is the key way.
Thanks, Georgia. Look, we might make this one last final question
Sure.
before we wrap it up. We've got a question from Sue saying clients often get upset because they want things done now and don't accept that we need to program and staff are not infinite. How can we deal with this unreasonable request? clients tell me it's a resourcing problem, nothing to do with them.
So this is where I'd say you need to again share your expertise and your technical knowledge. You need to educate them. So it's not about just them saying it's a resources problem. You can just say, and it's nothing to do with them. You can say, look, it's you can say absolutely we don't have infinite resources. So again, that's part of the problem. We identify what the problem is. We don't have infinite resources. However, there are some things that do take time, and I'd like to help you understand that so we can work out the best way forward. And it's around education sometimes with the client as to why they can't have things immediately, can be really powerful and can build trust in your expertise and your technical knowledge because you're helping them understand. Some clients won't be interested. Some clients won't get it, won't understand, and won't be reasonable. That's also human nature. But for a lot of people, if you can actually start to sit down and say, look, let's work through what is your biggest concern about why do you want this right now? Because it compromises the process or the quality. So again, what is the reality of their demand or their request to have it right now? What is it from their perspective? Ask the questions, find out the reasons why that is such a pressing issue for them. Talk to them about all the options and the way forward. So if it is yep, we don't have limited resources, we can bring that time frame forward by looking at additional resources, and that's going to cost you X, Y, and Z. So by having the conversation and asking the questions to understand their reality, what's happening for them that they want it right now, educating them, giving them options. Options include consequences, and then agreeing on the way forward. But education on using your expertise and technical knowledge can be quite powerful in those situations.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for your questions just now. And thank you, Georgia, for your responses. Look, Georgia's given us some really powerful tools to implement there. So I know I got a lot out of that presentation, and I hope all of you did as well. Hopefully that all leads to us improving our mental well-being and our experience of working with our clients and consultants and contractors and staff. So looking forward to practicing some of that. Thank you, Georgia.
Pleasure.
I would encourage you to have a look at the Henry Reid website. There's some really good resources there. A number of things that Georgia has spoken about, you'll find on that website. So please get along and have a look at Georgia's website. And I just wanted to give a bit of a plug to the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum. If you've enjoyed today, we do actually meet every second month. So it's a combination of online and in-person gatherings. Our next one will be an in-person breakfast in Brisbane in December on Thursday the 16th. And at that breakfast gathering, we will be reflecting on, what we've done in 2021 and planning for what we'd like to achieve at the Mental Wellbeing Forum for 2022. So look out for that invitation. We'd love to see you there. And if you're interstate, we'd love to see you on online next year. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Louise, for your facilitation of the session as well. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good week.
Thank you.